On a quiet summer afternoon in 2007, Brigitte Harris committed an act so shocking, so brutal, it would haunt everyone who heard about it. Inside her Rockaway apartment, her father, Eric Goodridge, sat handcuffed to a chair. His mouth was gagged, his body bound. Moments later he was dead, strangled by his own daughter. But what truly froze the blood of investigators wasn't just the murder. It was what Brigitte did next. With a scalpel in hand, she mutilated his body in a way that spoke of rage, pain, and something far darker. She castrated him. The story didn't end there. When police arrived at the scene, they found chilling notes left behind by Brigitte. "He wrecked my life," one read. "At first I blamed myself. Now I know it's not my fault." The media erupted with headlines that painted her as a monster, a cold-blooded killer. But as the truth began to unravel, the world learned that this wasn't just a story about murder. It was a story about years of unimaginable trauma. Brigitte Harris wasn't just Eric Goodridge's killer, she was also his victim. Born to Liberian immigrant parents, her childhood was marred by abandonment and abuse. Her father, the man she killed in such a horrifying way, had allegedly sexually abused her for years. She claimed he had done the same to others in their family and that he planned to take her young nieces back to Liberia against their will. For Brigitte, this wasn't just about revenge, it was about stopping him from hurting anyone else. What could drive someone to commit such an act? Was this premeditated vengeance? Or was it the desperate cry of someone who had been pushed far beyond the limits of human endurance? As we delve deeper into this case, we'll uncover the chilling details of that day, explore Brigitte's troubled past, and confront the haunting questions that remain unanswered. Stay with us as we unravel the story of Brigitte Harris, a woman whose name became synonymous with one of the most disturbing crimes in recent history. What led her to commit such an unthinkable act? And what does her story reveal about the devastating effects of trauma and abuse? This case drew significant media attention and public outcry. Supporters rallied around Brigitte, including prominent figures like U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer and New York State Senators Dianne Savino and Eric Adams. They viewed her not just as a perpetrator but as a victim who had endured unimaginable trauma. We are taught to forgive. Our most sacred texts urge us to find mercy, even for the most monstrous acts. But what if you were the one betrayed beyond repair? What if the person meant to keep you safe became the source of your deepest nightmares? This is the story of Brigitte Harris, a tale not just of a crime, but of a soul shattered by betrayal. Imagine carrying a secret so dark, so heavy, that it threatens to crush you from within. A secret about the very person who should have cherished you. For years, Brigitte lived with that burden, enduring horrors no child should ever face. Her father, the word itself twisted into a weapon of fear. We know what she did in that moment of desperation, but can we ever truly grasp what she felt? On that fateful day when everything erupted, a lifetime of pain and terror condensed into one irreversible choice. Brigitte stood before her father, knife trembling in her hand, her heart screaming for release. Was it justice? Was it revenge? Or was it simply the desperate act of a woman trying to reclaim a life stolen from her piece by painful peace? As we dig deeper into this story, we must confront uncomfortable truths. Why did prominent figures like U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer and New York State Senators Dianne Savino and Eric Adams see Brigitte as a victim rather than a monster? What were the invisible scars that shaped her fate? How could the very systems designed to protect her have failed her so completely? What if that system abandoned you one day too? Join us as we journey into a world of unimaginable trauma and profound betrayal. Can we truly judge the choices made by someone pushed beyond the limits of human endurance? And what does Brigitte's story reveal about the hidden darkness that can exist within families, communities, and even ourselves? Prepare to have your heart broken, and your understanding of justice challenged forever. As we continue with this story, I want to take a moment to thank all my amazing subscribers. Your support means so much to me, and it's because of you that I can keep sharing these important and powerful stories. Thank you for being part of the Crime Scene Chronicles community. If you're new here, welcome. This channel is all about true crime, stories that are not just about what happened, but why it happened. We explore the lives behind the headlines, the untold truths, and the questions that make us think deeply about justice and human nature. If you enjoy true crime stories that go beyond the surface, please hit that subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll never miss an episode as we uncover some of the darkest and most fascinating cases together. Thank you for being here, and let's dive back into the story. July 28, 2007. A day like any other in the Rockaways, New York. Until it wasn't. Inside a quiet apartment, Eric Goodridge was found dead. Not just dead, but murdered in a way that defied comprehension. A killing so brutal, so intimate, it sent shockwaves through the city. The motive? Unclear. But the most disturbing detail was the castration. A gruesome act that spoke of rage, hatred, or something else entirely. The police quickly turned to one person, Brigitte Harris. Eric Goodridge's own daughter. A 26-year-old woman now facing the unthinkable. A woman with a history. Daughter accused of grisly murder, the headlines screamed. The world watched horrified. But what really happened in that apartment? What darkness drove a daughter to commit such an act? In the next few minutes, we'll untangle this twisted story. We'll examine Brigitte's life, the allegations of abuse, and the evidence that would eventually land her behind bars. But we'll also confront the uncomfortable questions. The questions that others have been too afraid to ask. Was Brigitte a monster? Or a victim? And what if the truth is more complicated than anyone imagined? What if we haven't heard all the details yet? Brigitte Harris. A name that evokes instant revulsion. But was she always this person? Or was she molded, broken, and driven to the edge? The answers lie buried in her past. And we're about to unearth them. Don't go anywhere. To understand what happened in that apartment, we have to go back. Back to the beginning. To Brigitte Harris's early life. To the events that shaped her, scarred her, and ultimately led her to that deadly confrontation with her father. Brigitte was born on June 6, 1981. Her parents were immigrants from Liberia, a country on the West African coast. She was born in Staten Island, New York. For the first 2 years of her life, she lived with her mother in an apartment in Park Hill. But then, something happened that would change everything. Her mother abandoned her. Just like that, gone. Can you imagine being that young and losing your mother? The woman who was supposed to love and care for you just leaves? What does that do to a child? After being abandoned by her mother, Brigitte went to live with her father, Eric Goodridge. They moved to Bayshore, Long Island. But even then, life wasn't easy. When her father moved back to his home country, Liberia, Brigitte was passed around, living with various relatives. And that's when the alleged abuse began. Brigitte claimed she was physically abused by her grandmother. And even more disturbingly, that she was sexually abused by a cousin. Think about that for a second. A young girl already abandoned by her mother, now facing violence and sexual abuse within her own family. Where was she supposed to turn? Who was supposed to protect her? During a family trip back to Liberia, Brigitte finally confronted her mother about the abuse at Eric's hands. It was a moment of raw emotion, a daughter desperately seeking answers from a mother who had been absent for so long. But Eric denied everything, claiming Brigitte was mentally ill. Can you imagine the frustration, the pain, of being disbelieved, of having your trauma dismissed as mere madness? Is it that he denied the incident happened? Or that he denied his responsibility for the incident? At 17, Brigitte moved out. By 2007, the time of the killing, she was working as a security guard at John F. Kennedy International Airport. She was trying to make a life for herself, trying to escape the shadows of her past. But could she ever truly escape? Or would those early traumas continue to haunt her, shaping her actions and ultimately leading her to that apartment in the Rockaways? But there's more to this story than just the abuse allegations. Brigitte also had an online presence, a MySpace page where she referred to herself as Lady Vengeance and the original Dark Angel. Was this just teenage angst? Or was it a sign of something darker brewing within her? Was this a cry for help that went unheard? Or was it the seed of something more sinister? What does all of this say about Brigitte's state of mind in the months and weeks leading up to her father's death? Was she a woman on the verge of a breakdown? Or was she carefully plotting her revenge? We'll be exploring those questions and more as we delve deeper into her psyche. We also have to consider what experts in trauma have to say about all this. What are the long-term effects of childhood abuse? How can it warp a person's perception of reality? And how might it have influenced Brigitte's actions on that fateful day? Could her early life experiences have been a factor in her later actions? The answers, as you might suspect, are far from simple. But to truly understand the case of Brigitte Harris, we have to grapple with these difficult questions. We have to look beyond the headlines and into the heart of a woman who was, perhaps, as much a victim as she was a perpetrator. But here's the thing. Even if Brigitte was abused, does that justify what she did? Does it excuse the violence, the brutality? That's the question that jurors wrestled with. That's the question that we, too, must confront. And it's a question that may not have an easy answer. Was the scale of justice equally proportionate? What are your thoughts? So, how did this young woman with this troubled past end up killing and castrating her own father? What was the breaking point? What was the final straw? That's what we'll be exploring next. Stay with us. The years of pain and trauma were about to come to an end. On July 28, 2007, Brigitte Harris found herself face to face with her father, Eric Goodrich, in her Rockaway apartment. But this wasn't just any family reunion. This was the day everything would change. What led to this moment? Brigitte had been estranged from her father for years. But then, out of the blue, her sister Carlene reached out. Eric wanted to talk to them, she said. Brigitte agreed to meet. But when she arrived, she saw something that made her blood run cold. One of her nieces was sitting on Eric's lap. In that instant, all the memories of her own abuse came flooding back. An argument erupted. Eric dropped a bombshell. He was planning to take his granddaughters back to Liberia. Against their will. Brigitte felt the walls closing in. She couldn't let history repeat itself. She couldn't let those girls suffer the same fate she had. So she made a plan. She lured Eric to her apartment with emails. She had to stop him, she thought. She had to take away his weapon. When Eric arrived at the apartment, Brigitte was ready. She handcuffed him to a chair, gagged him with a towel to muffle his screams. And then she began to strangle him. Was this revenge? Or a desperate attempt to protect her nieces? As the life drained from Eric's eyes, what was going through Brigitte's mind? But Brigitte wasn't done. Using a scalpel, she cut off Eric's penis. The act was brutal, shocking. But according to investigators, Eric was already dead when this happened. Was this final act a symbol of Brigitte reclaiming her power? Or had she crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? After the deed was done, Brigitte made a crucial decision. She called 911. She told the operator about Eric's condition. She said she was on her way to the police station. But she never showed up. Instead, she called her sister Carlene. I did it, she said. What was Carlene's reaction? Did she understand what her sister had done? Carlene advised Brigitte not to turn herself in. Instead, she told her to come to her house. When Brigitte arrived, still in shock and holding the bloody scalpel, Carlene made another call, this time for an ambulance. The sisters then made a decision that would shape the course of the investigation. They checked Brigitte into the Richmond University Medical Center's psychiatric ward. As Brigitte sat in the sterile hospital room, did she realize the full weight of what she had done? Did she feel relief? Regret? Or was she still trapped in the nightmare of her past? Meanwhile, the police were piecing together the gruesome scene at the apartment. They found Eric's mutilated body. They discovered chilling notes Brigitte had left behind. He wrecked my life, one read. At first, I blamed myself. Now I know it's not my fault, said another. These weren't just evidence. They were a window into Brigitte's tormented psyche. The investigation moved quickly. Brigitte was charged with second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter. She was held at Rikers Island, a far cry from the life she had been trying to build for herself as an airport security guard. But as the case unfolded, questions began to emerge. Had the police fully explored the possibility of long-term abuse? Were there pieces of evidence they had overlooked? And perhaps most importantly, how would the justice system handle a case where the line between victim and perpetrator was so blurred? Brigitte's online presence added another layer of complexity to the case. Her MySpace page, where she called herself Lady Vengeance and the original Dark Angel, painted a picture of a deeply troubled woman. But was this a cry for help that went unheard? Or evidence of premeditation? As the trial approached, public opinion was divided. Some saw Brigitte as a cold-blooded killer. Others, including prominent figures like U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer and State Senators Dianne Savino and Eric Adams, rallied to her support. They saw her as a victim who had finally snapped after years of abuse. The stage was set for a trial that would captivate the nation. But as the courtroom drama unfolded, would the full truth of what happened in that Rockaway apartment ever come to light? And more importantly, would justice be served for Eric, for Brigitte, and for all the silent victims of abuse? Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the trial of Brigitte Harris, a case that challenges our understanding of justice, trauma, and the long-lasting effects of abuse. The investigation was over and the trial loomed. Brigitte needed a lawyer. But who would take on such a difficult case? A case where the crime was so brutal, so shocking? That's when Arthur L. Nadala stepped in. A well-known New York attorney, Nadala agreed to represent Brigitte pro bono, meaning he wouldn't charge her a dime. Why would he do that? What did he see in Brigitte that made him believe in her? He was so passionate to take the case, and he knew the trial would be difficult for Brigitte. Nadala knew he faced an uphill battle. The crime was gruesome, the evidence damning. His strategy was clear: to convince the jury that Brigitte was not a cold-blooded killer, but a victim who had been pushed too far. He needed to show them the years of abuse, the trauma that had warped her mind, the desperation that led her to that apartment. How can she prove this story? But the prosecution had a different story to tell. They argued that Brigitte's actions were premeditated, that she had planned to kill her father all alone. They pointed to the notes she had left at the crime scene, the MySpace page where she called herself Lady Vengeance, and the brutal nature of the crime itself. Was this the work of a woman who had snapped? Or of someone who had been carefully plotting her revenge? The trial began. It was a media circus, with reporters from all over the world descending on the courthouse. The courtroom was packed every day, with people eager to witness the drama unfold. One of the most crucial moments of the trial was Brigitte's testimony. She took the stand in her own defense, facing the jury, the judge, and the ghost of her father. She spoke about the abuse she had suffered as a child, the years of pain and trauma that had haunted her. She admitted to killing her father, but claimed it was not premeditated. She said she had only wanted to stop him from hurting her nieces. She even admitted to researching the Lorena Bobbitt case, the infamous woman who had cut off her husband's penis. Brigitte claimed she had considered doing the same to her father, but only as a way to protect others. Did the jury believe her story? Or did they see her as a manipulative liar? Her sister, Carlene Goodridge, also took the stand. Her testimony was crucial. She confirmed Brigitte's claims of abuse, painting a picture of a family scarred by violence and trauma. But Carlene also admitted that Brigitte had a troubled past, that she had struggled with mental illness. Did Carlene's testimony help Brigitte's case? Or did it backfire, casting doubt on her credibility? The prosecution hammered away at Brigitte's story, pointing out inconsistencies and contradictions. They argued that her actions were too extreme, too violent, to be excused by any amount of abuse. They reminded the jury of the gruesome details of the crime, the castration, the strangulation, the overwhelming amount of violence. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. The jurors deliberated for days, wrestling with the evidence, the emotions, and the complex legal questions. They were torn. Some believed Brigitte was a victim who deserved their sympathy. Others saw her as a dangerous criminal who deserved to be punished. Finally, they reached a verdict: not guilty of murder, but guilty of second-degree manslaughter. A compromise. A recognition that while Brigitte may have been responsible for her father's death, she wasn't a cold-blooded killer. What does this say about their thought processes? The judge sentenced Brigitte to the maximum, 5 to 15 years in prison. A harsh sentence, but one that reflected the seriousness of the crime. As she was led away in handcuffs, did Brigitte feel relief that it was finally over? Or despair at the years she would spend behind bars? Even after the verdict, the debate continued. One of the jurors spoke out, saying that they did not believe Brigitte deserved any murder charges. They felt she had suffered enough, that she was more a victim than a criminal. The case of Brigitte Harris is more than just a true crime story. It's a story about intergenerational trauma, about the cycle of abuse that can shatter families and destroy lives. It's a story about race and class, about how those factors can influence public perception and the outcome of a trial. It's also a story about media representation, about how the media can sensationalize and distort the truth, turning complex human beings into caricatures. Was the media's portrayal of Brigitte fair? Or was it biased, fueled by prejudice and a desire for sensationalism? What about the legal and ethical questions raised by the case? When is self-defense justified? How does alleged abuse impact criminal culpability? And what is the role of the justice system in addressing intergenerational trauma? These are questions that continue to be debated to this day. After serving 3 years in prison, Brigitte was released. She expressed a desire to work with steps to end family violence, to help other victims of abuse. But what has happened to her since then? Where is Brigitte now? Has she been able to rebuild her life? Has she found peace? Or is she still haunted by the ghosts of her past? What kind of obstacles does a former convict face? And what about those who supported her, like Senator Chuck Schumer and State Senators Dianne Savino and Eric Adams? Why did they believe in her? What did they hope to achieve by supporting her? Did they feel vindicated by the jury's verdict? Or did they believe she deserved even more leniency? Did they expect the public backlash to be so intense? The case of Brigitte Harris is a complex and disturbing story. It's a story that challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about abuse, violence, and the human capacity for both good and evil. It's a story that continues to resonate years after the crime was committed. But perhaps the most important question of all is this: what can we learn from Brigitte's story? How can we prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future? How can we break the cycle of abuse and create a society where everyone feels safe, protected, and valued? This story is coming to an end, but we want you to remember, what if you were in her shoes? What would you have done? What actions will you take? We walked through Brigitte's childhood, a story filled with pain and loss. Abandoned by her mother, she claimed she suffered abuse at the hands of family members, including her own father. Did those early experiences set her on an inescapable path? Or was she simply a victim of circumstance, caught in a web of trauma and violence? Is it fair to be put in that position? We saw her struggling to make a life for herself, working as a security guard, trying to escape her past. But the past, as we know, has a way of catching up with you. Is it possible to escape the trauma of your past? What would it take? Then came that day, July 28, 2007. The confrontation with her father, the violence, the castration, a moment of pure, unadulterated rage. Some say it was revenge. Some claim she snapped. But what if it was something more? What if it was a desperate attempt to protect others from the same fate she had suffered? Was her story a cry for help to be heard? What could someone do to protect themselves? We followed the trial, the accusations, the defenses, the difficult decisions the jury had to make. We saw a system trying to make sense of something that seemed to defy all logic. But in the end, was justice truly served? Was Brigitte held accountable for her actions? Or was she a victim of a system that failed to understand the complexities of her case? Is the judicial system built for that, and does it have the resources to hear everyone out? So where is Brigitte Harris now? After serving 3 years, she was released from prison in 2012. She expressed a desire to work with steps to end family violence, to help other victims of abuse. But what became of that dream? Has she been able to rebuild her life, to find peace after all the trauma she has endured? What obstacles may have gotten in the way? What are your thoughts on Brigitte's sentence? Was it too harsh? Too lenient? Or just right? What would you have done if you were on the jury? I'm curious to read your opinions in the comments below. What about the impact of this case? Did it change anything? Did it raise awareness about the complexities of abuse and trauma? Or was it just another sensationalized crime story that quickly faded from the headlines? Do you think that the media coverage of Brigitte's case was fair and balanced? Or did it perpetuate harmful stereotypes and biases? Did it help or hurt her chances of a fair trial? How could the media have done better? Brigitte Harris's story is a reminder that violence and trauma can have devastating consequences, not just for the victims but for the perpetrators as well. And that our legal system, while striving for justice, must also strive for understanding and compassion. So, as we come to the end of this journey, let's remember Brigitte Harris. Not just as a name in a headline but as a human being. A woman with a past, a woman with a story, a woman whose life was forever changed by violence and trauma. What lessons did you learn from her story? And if you want to explore more true crime cases with me, make sure to subscribe to Crime Scene Chronicles. And if you enjoyed this documentary, please give it a like and share it with your friends. The more people who see this, the more we can raise awareness about these important issues. Also, let me know in the comments what other true crime cases you'd like me to explore on this channel. This has been Crime Scene Chronicles, and I thank you so much for watching.